They thought Metallica would stay quiet. They thought the band that once ruled the tape-trading underground wouldn't care if their music was passed around for free in the digital age. They were wrong. It began with an unfinished song. I Disappear was still in the works. Not mixed, not mastered, not even close to ready for release. But one morning in early 2000, Metallica found out it had appeared online. And not just on some obscure fan site, but on a brand new service called Napster.
And through such a fascinating change in music, too, because I mean, obviously, Lars was a huge figure in the controversy surrounding MP3s, you know, and that was like during the Napster days. That was the time where everybody realized, like, holy shit, something just happened.
The track spread like wildfire. One person downloaded it, then 10, then hundreds, and soon it was everywhere. Napster was unlike anything the music industry had ever seen. With just a computer and an internet connection, anyone could grab songs for free. No CD purchase, no trip to the record store, no rules. You clicked a button and the music was yours. For fans, it felt like magic. For Metallica, it felt like a punch in the gut. This wasn't just one leak. When the band looked closer, they realized their entire catalog, every album, every B-side, even rare live recordings, was on Napster. Years of work, poured into their music, was being traded without permission, without pay, and without any control over how it was used. To Metallica, this wasn't harmless sharing. This was theft. They had built their name on hard work and a loyal fan base. In the early days, they'd encouraged tape trading of their live shows. But this was different. This wasn't a fan making a copy for a friend. It was millions of strangers taking whatever they wanted. And Metallica decided they wouldn't let it slide. They could ignore it and watch the flood grow, or they could fight back. And once they made their choice, there was no turning back. This was no longer just about one song. It was about the future of music, and Metallica was ready to go to war. Napster had exploded onto the scene in 1999. It was the brainchild of a college student named Sean Fanning and his friend, Sean Parker. The idea was simple. Create a program where users could share MP3 files directly with each other. But that simple idea turned into a tidal wave almost overnight. By early 2000, Napster had millions of users all over the world. For fans, it felt like a dream come true. Suddenly, music wasn't locked away behind store shelves or expensive CDs. It was all right there on your computer screen, ready to download in minutes. Want the latest single? Click. Looking for a rare live recording? Click. A song you heard once on the radio but never saw in stores? Click. It was all there, and it was free. Napster wasn't just for the big hits either. People were sharing deep cuts, demos, even bootlegs that had never been officially released. For music lovers, it was like finding a secret door to a massive vault that had been sealed for decades. And the more people joined, the bigger that vault became. But there was a problem. Almost all of it was copyrighted. Every download was technically illegal. And the more the platform grew, the more it caught the attention of the music industry. Record labels saw it as a direct threat to their business. Artists started to notice their songs circulating without their permission. And some, like Dr. Dre, were already preparing to fight back. Still, Napster didn't slow down. By the time Metallica discovered I Disappear on the platform, the service had become a cultural phenomenon. It wasn't some underground hacker network. It was mainstream. Kids were telling their parents about it. College dorms were running it day and night. The music industry was losing control, and Napster was gaining it. To Metallica, this wasn't just a new technology. It was a warning sign. They had seen trends come and go, but nothing had ever threatened their music at this scale. And if Napster wasn't stopped, they believed the future of the entire music business was at risk. That's when the band decided to take their fight out of the studio and into the courtroom. Metallica didn't just fire off a letter to Napster and hope for the best. They went all in. In April 2000, the band filed a lawsuit against Napster in federal court, accusing the company of massive copyright infringement. But this wasn't going to be a quiet legal battle fought behind closed doors. Metallica made sure the world knew exactly what was happening. The lawsuit demanded that Napster remove every single Metallica song from its platform. But the band took it even further. They hired a digital security firm to track down every user who was sharing their music. What they found was staggering. More than 335,000 accounts had Metallica songs in their libraries. Most bands would have stopped at going after the company, but Metallica decided to name names, literally. On May 3, 2000, drummer Lars Ulrich walked into Napster's San Mateo headquarters carrying a 13-pound stack of paper. Inside were all 335,435 usernames, printed out line by line. Lars handed it over in front of news cameras, telling reporters that these people should be banned from the service immediately. It was a bold move, but it was also risky. To many fans, it didn't look like Metallica was just protecting their music. It looked like they were turning on the very people who had supported them for years. The image of Lars delivering that massive list became one of the defining moments of the entire Napster saga. In court, Metallica's argument was clear. This wasn't about greed, it was about control. They said that without permission from the artist, no one had the right to distribute or download their songs. And in the eyes of the law, they had a point. But in the court of public opinion, things were already starting to shift, and not in their favor. The moment Lars Ulrich handed over that list, the public mood changed. Metallica had been one of the most respected and untouchable names in rock for nearly 2 decades, but now they were being painted as the enemy. Headlines blared with phrases like, "Metallica sues its own fans," and late-night comedians roasted them night after night. Fans who had once worshipped the band now felt betrayed. Outside concerts, protesters held up signs that read, "Napster forever" and "Metallica sucks." In interviews, Lars tried to explain that the fight wasn't about money. It was about an artist's right to decide how their music was used. But for many listeners, those words didn't matter anymore. What they saw was a wealthy rock band going after teenagers and college kids for downloading songs. The backlash wasn't just coming from the public. Other musicians began to distance themselves from the fight, worried that taking Metallica's side would make them look greedy too. And for Napster's growing user base, the band became a symbol of everything wrong with the old music industry: big, corporate, and unwilling to adapt to change. At shows, Metallica could feel the difference. Where there had once been nothing but cheers, now there were boos mixed in. Where fans once lined up for autographs, some now stood in line to protest. The war over Napster wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It had become a cultural one, and in that war, Metallica was outnumbered. After months of headlines, protests, and heated interviews, the legal fight finally reached its turning point. In 2001, the court ruled in Metallica's favor. Napster was ordered to block all of the band's songs from its service. But the ruling didn't stop there. The decision also laid out that Napster had to prevent any copyrighted music from being traded without permission. It was a crushing blow to the company. Napster's appeal failed, and its user base began to collapse almost overnight. By the summer of 2001, the service that had once shaken the entire music industry was effectively shut down. On paper, Metallica had won the battle, but victories in court don't always feel like victories in real life. The damage to the band's reputation was already done. The moment they filed the lawsuit, the story had stopped being about copyright law and started being about loyalty. And to many, Metallica had failed that test. They had taken down Napster, but in the process, they had also alienated thousands of their own fans. Even with the case closed, the controversy lingered. For years, interviews about new albums or tours would still circle back to Napster. The band had become forever linked to the fight, and no matter how they tried to explain it, a large part of the public saw them as the villains of the story. The end of the Napster case didn't mean the end of Metallica's problems. In fact, the years that followed would become some of the most turbulent in the band's history. The public backlash over the lawsuit was still fresh when tensions inside the group began to boil over. Bassist Jason Newsted announced he was leaving in early 2001, citing personal reasons, but behind the scenes, creative conflicts and exhaustion had been building for years. Not long after Newsted's departure, James Hetfield entered rehab for alcohol and substance abuse. The band's recording sessions for what would become the Saint Anger album came to a sudden halt. For the first time since their early days, it felt like Metallica might not survive. The members weren't just fighting the public's perception, they were struggling to keep themselves together. These cracks were laid bare in the 2004 documentary some kind of monster, which followed the band through therapy sessions, heated arguments, and moments where it seemed like walking away was the only option. Watching the footage, it was clear that the Napster fight had left a scar. The stress of the legal war, the criticism from fans, and the feeling of being misunderstood had all added to the weight on the band's shoulders. Yet somehow, they pushed through. Hetfield completed rehab, the band regrouped, and they brought in bassist Robert Trujillo to fill Newsted's spot. By the mid-2000s, they were back on the road, determined to prove they could still deliver the thunderous live shows that had made them legends. But even as they rebuilt, the shadow of Napster followed them everywhere they went. Today, Napster is more of a trivia answer than a household name. The service that once shook the entire music industry is remembered as both a warning and a starting point for the digital revolution. After its shutdown, the brand was eventually revived as a legal paid music service, but it never recaptured the wild, rebellious energy of those early days. For Metallica, the legacy of the fight is complicated. In the long run, they were proven right about one thing. The way music was distributed and consumed was changing forever. Streaming platforms like iTunes, Spotify, and Apple Music would eventually adopt the very model that Napster pioneered, except with licensing deals and payments to artists. The battle over digital music wasn't avoided, it was simply delayed until the industry figured out how to make it profitable. But the cost to Metallica's public image was real. Even decades later, the words Napster and Metallica are still linked in the minds of many fans. For some, the fight cemented the band as defenders of artists' rights. For others, it was the moment Metallica stopped being the people's band and became just another part of the corporate machine. And yet, despite the backlash, the near breakup, and the years of bad press, Metallica survived. They returned to making music, touring the world, and selling out stadiums. They outlasted Napster, outlasted the critics, and outlasted the very storm that almost tore them apart. But the story of their clash with Napster remains one of the most infamous chapters in rock history, a reminder that even the loudest, most unstoppable bands can be brought to the brink, not by another musician, but by a single song on a computer screen.